There is a lot of pro wrestling out there. So much so that no one person could even imagine watching every single thing recorded in their entire lifetime. If you Google any of your favorite wrestlers' names and the word versus, click on the video section, you have yourselves anywhere from a couple dozen to hundreds of options to choose from, when you're picking matches, that is. With all this information out there, I wanted to help you, yes, you, discover a wrestler you might not have heard of, or if you've heard of them, might not have checked out in depth, underneath the deluge of online discourse. I called this sporadic series Your New Favorite Wrestler, because I guarantee at least one of you out there hasn't heard of this person, and they are the exact type of wrestler you love, but you just haven't seen them yet. I'll go over 4 of the matches that I think will give you a broad understanding of what makes them so special. These won't always be the most niche wrestlers you've ever heard of, but as I said, there's a lot of wrestling out there. It's bound to be someone's first time hearing about somebody. In today's episode, I'm here to talk about Survival Tobita, the man with the most singularly unique vision in pro wrestling history. Describing this guy might take just as long as reviewing his matches, but bear with me. If you don't know who Tobita is, you're gonna need it. First things first, Survival Tobita is a legend of the aptly named sleaze indie scene in Japan. Wrestling on gym mats and in rec centers not built for wrestling far more often than any sort of ring or storied venue. He's not the best trained wrestler in the universe. He can't grab a quick, flashy counterhold or do any impressive dives, but he more than makes up for those quote-unquote shortcomings with the pure heart in all of his performances. His equivalent of a manifesto is emblazoned across his most famous shirt. He is very die-hard. He is just a real rock and roller. His real name, if you were unaware, is Masaru Tobita. His 2 goals are as follows: knock out all enemy, and attack all monsters. The man is a camo-clad superhero in every sense of the word. Starting in the late 90s, he spent a good majority of his career as that hero, protecting our planet from beasts and monsters of every shape and size. Whether it's an ape, a robot, or a cardboard box, he is humanity's front line of defense against these harbingers of our demise. The best part of this whole deal, he takes himself completely seriously. He believes that in the wrestling ring, or on these wrestling mats, or wherever he's wrestling, he is the savior of the world, our only line of defense from the heinous beasts before him. The crowd are all in on the joke, laughing along with how utterly ridiculous the concept is, but Tobita himself never breaks. This isn't funny to him. This is life or death for the entire human race. This would come off as some goofy, ironic schlock in anybody else's hands. A mere novelty to point and laugh at in a top 10 YouTube listicle slop video. In Survival Tobita's hands, though, the whole presentation is so earnest and passionate that you can't help but like it. His work almost reminds me of the 1999 documentary American Movie, where an amateur filmmaker sets out to create a passion project that isn't very good by any traditional standards, but the process is so over the top and ridiculous that it gives you even more of a glimpse into the people making the film, and you kind of get to like them after a while. I'm not the first person to draw that point of comparison, and I won't be the last, but I'm also not the only person who loves Survival Tobita out there. Not the first, and definitely not the last yet again. Everybody who knows about this guy loves him, from the message board elder statesman who first gave him his flowers in the US, all the way up to wrestlers like Bryan Danielson, who name-dropped Tobita in a 2002 interview on the ugliest looking website I've ever seen in my entire life. I had a hard time describing the man any further than this, but felt the need to. So I did what all great business minds do: outsourced my work to other people. I asked a bunch of fellow Tobita fans to describe the man in just 3 words, and all of the responses are listed on screen. I've sorted them into 4 neat little categories so you can best understand the ways people talk about him, and the ways people responded to this prompt. The first category is what I like to call the shirt squadron. A lot of people responded with at least one line from his manifesto t-shirt. Unfortunately, nobody gave me name Masaru Tobita or knockout enemy, so we don't have the full shirt listed in the responses. Most of them is close enough though. Most of the replies I got fall under the second category, people describing what Tobita means to them in a 3-word statement, all of which connect to one another. These are just as telling about the people who sent them in and what they love in and outside of wrestling as they are about Tobita himself. Most of these, in some way or another, refer to the man as a superhero. Exactly what kind of superhero varies from person to person, but you cannot avoid that through line anytime somebody brings his name up. As you can also probably tell from these responses, the people who love Tobita love him. He has a cult following that started in the message board days, but is still going strong to this day. If you haven't seen him work yet, you'll understand why when we get there. The third category, the one I find most fascinating, is people who used 3 separate words for the guy rather than one coherent thought. While the second category was dominated by people describing his actual wrestling, as he is a superhero in the ring, this section gets to the heart of why so many people fell in love with the guy's work on a different level. It isn't just the monster fighting that people like, it's the way he presents those monster fights that makes him a legendary figure in these cult circles. They also say a lot about what people want in their wrestling: ambition, wonder, eccentricity, charm, pile drivers, all of which describe the man pretty darn well. My favorite of the bunch, as always, comes from one of my all-time favorite wrestling writers, J.R. Goldberg. He describes Tobita as inspired, ambitious, and wondrous. I love this one especially because it works just as well for Survival Tobita as it would a great kaiju fight. Our final category, the most puzzling, insightful, and important of the bunch, is how Survival Tobita would describe himself. I still don't understand a couple of these. I'm not quite sure what Fool of Farm is or what Hall of Fame he's against, but who cares? Quick editor's note, it seems the Hall of Fame he's fighting against is the International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in Albany, New York, and understandably so. It's a supposedly international Hall of Fame that almost exclusively includes American pro wrestlers and memorabilia from American pro wrestling. It's the only Hall of Fame of its kind with a building, so by any other sports standards, that makes it the official Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. This clears a few things up, so thank you for the clarification, Tobita. Still no idea what Fool of Farm means. I think the best description outside of JR's is actually a 2-word statement: strongest scavenger. I can't think of 2 words that describe Tobita's entire appeal more than those. He is a scavenger, working the most bare bones of arenas in a company literally called Unemployment Pro Wrestling, which makes the next one make a lot more sense. He's never had the highest production value in the world, but he doesn't care. He will make this wrestling thing work, no matter how many sleeping bags he has to use for mats. He is obviously the strongest, because he has defended our planet countless times from countless otherworldly forces, readily available on YouTube or otherwise. Thank you, Survival Tobita, for your wonderful insights into yourself. There is one running theme through all of these matches, the ones best suited to introduce the uninitiated to Tobita's specific stylings. All of them involve him fighting somebody shaped like a box. Survival Tobita vs. Mokujin Ken, better known as Ken the Box. Saitama Pro Wrestling Company, August 23rd, 1999. This is a match of many firsts to introduce you to Survival Tobita. It's our first time in what I like to call the Survival Zone, a rec center without a wrestling ring. In its place stands a few barely padded gymnasium wrestling mats, which I think is the perfect environment for Tobita to take on his many foes. We also meet Naoshi Sano for the first time, the man who reffed every single Tobita monster match in the Survival Zone, and one of the most ubiquitous Japanese sleaze indie wrestlers of all time. Look him up on Cage Match, he's on every card imaginable. It's insane. This match also starts the tradition of epic fight scene music played on blast in the background of his matches. Between this and a few other classic examples, I am convinced that more wrestling matches should involve music, whether it's being played live or blaring through the speakers. Most importantly, we're introduced to the King Ghidorah to Tobita's Godzilla, the Lord Zed to his Green Ranger. Enter Mokujin Ken. Often known as Ken the Box, this monster is a wooden Goliath with trunks for arms and roots for feet, or foot, singular. Built out of what looks like cardboard and paper mache, he's easily Tobita's most recognizable opponent, and for good reason. All Ken does in this first match is slowly shuffle around, wave his arms up and down rapidly, like a child excited for yogurt or something, and occasionally whomp our hero right in the noggin. And it's not even a fair fight. Ken nails a good 5 punches with those hard-ass fists, and Tobita can't get his shit together after the first. He gets flattened like an early card jobber, and the entire world is in danger thanks to this beating. Now, I already said that Tobita isn't the most mechanically sound wrestler you've ever seen, but that does not detract from his work in the slightest for me. There are 2 aspects of wrestling I didn't mention, though, that the real rock and roller has mastered: the bump and the sell. This match fails or succeeds entirely upon Tobita's bumps and sells. His whole thing kinda does, too. If these heinous beasts can't convincingly pose a threat to our greatest hero, why are we so scared that they'll take over the world in the first place? I will say that some of his selling might not exactly be intentional. He might have been actually clipped by a few of those paper mache punches and genuinely hurt, knocked out on the floor. Either way, his selling is fantastic. In yet another first, a total of 5 firsts in these 10 minutes of screen time, this match also introduces us to another long-standing Survival Tobita selling point: his post-fight monologues. Whether he wins or loses, Tobita will take the mic after the match to cut an exhausted, long-winded promo to the fans in attendance, none of which I can make out or translate despite my best efforts, but I'm sure it's inspiring. Our hero is down, but he sure as hell isn't out. He will try to get his revenge against the boxy behemoth not even a week later in Survival Tobita vs. Ken the Box 2. NEO Japan Ladies Cup 1999. August 25th, 1999. Just 2 days after he got his ass handed to him by Mokujin Ken for the first time, Tobita shows up again to try and beat this boxy monster, this time in a women's promotion. Yes, the second match between Survival Tobita and Mokujin Ken happened in NEO, a Japanese indie promotion that, as the show title suggests, is a promotion that mainly features women's wrestling. They had to make the exception for these two, though. Here, we meet Mokujin Ken's most famous adversary besides Tobita, any elevated surface. You see, Ken the Box is boxes, so he doesn't have any legs to climb or arm strength to lift himself up. The best he can do is shuffle around the ring, waving his arms out of frustration rather than murderous glee. That fantastic bit, and the subsequent camera angle change that the bit requires, are pretty much the only two differences between the first Ken match and this one. In his anger, Tobita rushes to the outside to try to meet Ken the Box on his level, but yet again he gets no offense in. Ken pummels him with those ball fists so hard that one of them dents, and after struggling to his feet a few times, Tobita can no longer withstand the wooden onslaught. I say pretty much because there's one more thing that differentiates this from their first. Tobita bleeds. For my knowledge, this is one of the first times we've ever seen our savior bleed, and he busts one hell of a gusher. It's not a full Two-Face situation, but there's a solid red line down the middle of his head. Don't get me wrong, even though I love this stuff, I don't think blood inherently makes a pro wrestling match better, but I won't deny that between Tobita's blade job, Ken's inability to get into the ring, and the small area they have to fight against one another, these little wrinkles are just enough for me to love this one just as much as I love the first. All in all, it's a match so nice that they had to do it twice. Now at a record of 0-2 against Mokujin Ken, bloodied, embarrassed, and defeated, Survival Tobita cuts another promo on the stage, possibly plotting his revenge against the boxed one for a final contest between the two. Survival Tobita versus Naoshi Sano and Mokujin Ken. Unknown promotion, unknown date. I hate doing that, but nobody in the YouTube comments section could figure out where or when this match happened. My best guess, based on how long it took between the first match and the second, is that this match happened in late August or early September 1999, but I don't know for sure. This is essentially the same as their last match, out-of-ring placement, punches, blood, and all, with two noticeable differences. The first is that this is a handheld, not shot from the camera angle we're used to for Survival Tobita matches. One that, unfortunately, doesn't capture many of Ken's punches on him. The other factor is the third competitor in the ring, the Sleaze legend himself. No longer confined to his blue and white striped referee shirt, Naoshi Sano tries his hand at beating Ken to make this a triple threat. I call Sano a competitor in this match in the loosest possible terms. He makes his entrance, waits for Ken, knocks him over the head with a weapon, most likely a kendo stick. Ken punches him, and he's down. We don't see or hear from him for the rest of the match. As for Tobita, he befalls the same fate as every time beforehand, even if we can't see as much of it from this angle. Ken only has to nail the man with 2 barrages to take him down this time, further humiliating Tobita as he waves his arms up and down out of joy. Tobita bleeds again in this one, as I mentioned before, but we only ever get to see it after the fact, when he cuts his post-match promo. This is the least memorable of his fights with Mokujin Ken, but I still think it's an essential element of what makes Survival Tobita so likable. No matter how strong he is, nobody bats 1,000. Even though Ken has his number, he keeps trying for that white whale, or in this case, beige box. The most notable thing about this one, and the reason I covered it over anything else in Tobita's repertoire, is that this is the last time he and Mokujin Ken faced off against one another, leaving our savior with a record of 0-3 against the box. The guy didn't even land a single hit on Ken this whole series. In fact, Ken remains the only monster Survival Tobita has never defeated, not even once. Tobita usually dispatches his foes in a single match, sending them back to whatever realm they emerged from. Ken the Box is the insurmountable hurdle that nobody, not even our greatest warrior, can overcome. In a world invaded by robot monsters, aliens, and other various evil creatures, the only one that cannot be vanquished is the embodiment of nature itself. While Survival Tobita ensures us that the world will not be taken over by forces out of our control, Mokujin Ken reminds us to take care of the planet that Tobita so desperately wants to save. That, or Tobita just thought it would be funny if a guy in a cardboard box was his arch nemesis. Dealer's choice, honestly. Survival Tobita vs. Bauxite Medium, Saitama Pro Wrestling Company, April 29th, 2000. Now, we've all had our fun here. I've made my jokes about how beautifully ridiculous Tobita's whole thing is and why I find it so endearing, but I am not kidding around when I say this. Survival Tobita vs. Bauxite Medium is one of the greatest professional wrestling matches ever. It might also be one of the funniest in concept and execution. If you haven't seen this match before, please, do me and yourself a massive favor. Pause this video, copy the link to the match from the playlist in the description, grab a couple of friends to voice chat on Discord, preferably other people who haven't seen it, and enjoy the experience together. I don't want to influence your first viewing of this masterpiece, and it's a first watch best experienced with friends. If and when you do so, feel free to tag me on Twitter and let me know how it goes. Bauxite Medium, or Machina if you go by what the fans chant at him, is a giant robot with what looks like metal soy sauce containers as his hands. On his feet, it looks like he has those Astro Boy boots that Mischief put out a while ago, painted silver. And the rest of it looks like he just wrapped himself in tinfoil. The boxes, his main weapons in this match, are like elongated versions of the boxes Aja Kong would bring to her plunder matches, most notably the one against Bull Nakano in the cage. These ones, however, are directly attached to Bauxite's hands. He also seems to be a more peaceful creature than Mokujin Ken at first. Less interested in fighting than he is walking around and flailing his arms away, not too dissimilar from Ken, actually. That arm wave could also be Bauxite trying to threaten Tobita with the mannerisms of his strongest opponents, but I'm not convinced a robotic alien monstrosity is caught up on his Saitama Pro Wrestling tapes. I slightly question our savior's heroics in this one, and for pretty good reason. Tobita performs the most heinous, brutal, callous act of malice we've seen from him yet, all to get under the monster's skin. The man grabs a chair, sits on it, pulls a beer out of one of his many pants pockets, and proceeds to down it before tossing the empty can on the mat viciously. In Bauxite Medium's world, doing that to a can is the equivalent of killing a dog or a cat. Or at least that's my headcanon, especially with what happens next. Tobita doesn't look too super heroic in this moment. Murdering a defenseless can in front of a bunch of witnesses isn't going to win you a lot of good guy points. But on some level, I can sympathize with him. If I learned anything from the Watchmen ripoffs I've seen and read over the years, is that there are a lot of harsh realities behind these amazing gifts. Sometimes you gotta crack a few eggs to make an omelet. And if that omelet is the safety of the human race, Tobita will happily whisk up a few yolks. The right decision isn't always the easiest, and in this case, that wasn't even the right decision. Because this robot was not made for combat. It was, however, made to feel. Even though Bauxite is a machine made out of wires and gadgets, he still feels grief over this senseless murder, a grief that rapidly turns into anger. Bauxite's initial attack on Tobita is nothing short of legendary. It's one of the most heinous beatings I've seen in all of sleaze wrestling, and that is fucking saying something. It's made all the worse by Tobita's refusal to put his hands up and defend himself. He takes the brunt of these metal boxes right to the dome, nearly cracking his skull on the sharp edges more often than not. Tobita stands less than no chance head-to-head against a being like Bauxite, let alone an enraged Bauxite, so he must change course. This is where Survival Tobita evolves, before our very eyes, into a true kaiju superhero through both brains and brawn. Thinking quickly, Tobita pulls up the wood-paneled wrestling mats underneath him and hurls them at his metallic opponent. It's a scene ripped straight out of a kaiju movie, one where the combatant uses their environment as a weapon itself. This move doesn't just save Tobita's skin though, it outright changes the dynamic of the whole match. He uses these wooden panels to literally disarm Bauxite, detaching the weapons of mass destruction from his arms, and Tobita unleashes his final form. He gains the upper hand with a very simple strategy, by hurling whatever weapon he can find at the beast until it stops moving. This time, the weapon just so happens to be gym mats. He literally buries Bauxite under a pile of these wooden mats that look at least 15 pounds each, plops his entire 200+ pound body weight on the robot, and pins him with sheer sandwiching power. It's a sick finish. Even sicker when you realize Bauxite Medium is getting crushed Giles Corey style under all of that weight for far longer than necessary for the victory. By far Tobita's most convincing win to date, and the clearest sign we've seen yet that humanity will prevail against these horrors. This is essential Survival Tobita material, even more so than the famous Mokujin Ken bouts. It's a damn near flawless representation of everything the man stands for. His ambitious ring work, the outlandish stories he tells on the gym mats, and his uncompromising will are all on full display against Bauxite Medium. If you enjoy the absurd carnage on display, nothing in wrestling comes closer to a low-budget kaiju fight than this. So much in wrestling in 2024 is ironic. One of the two major companies in the US spends 15 to 20 minutes of their 2-hour weekly TV show poking fun at how silly and goofy wrestling can be. In response, more and more people are calling for earnestness and sincerity in their pro wrestling. They want to feel engaged with what's going on, not like they're being pandered to, nudged at, or, God forbid, laughed at by the wrestlers. If a wrestler doesn't treat a threat or opponent seriously, why the hell should I? Sure, you could say that the eruption of kayfabe has a big part to play in this whole equation, but I don't think people knowing wrestling is predetermined means they can't care about a wrestler, their struggles, their failures, and their successes. That's why, when I watch Survival Tobita get his ass handed to him by cardboard and tinfoil robots, just to get back up and valiantly save the day, I care. I get invested because he's invested. Tobita's wrestling displays more passion and pure love for the art form than pretty much anybody out there. All of this makes him the perfect antidote if you're sick of irony-poisoned stories. Survival Tobita is everything that everybody said about him so far. From a funny guy to Earth's last line of defense from incomprehensible forces, and all of these descriptors mean something. These aren't generic catch-all statements that you could say about any wrestler. Hell, I don't think any other wrestler fits this same exact bill the way that Tobita does. If I had to give my own 3-word definition of this guy, one of the most interesting wrestlers of all time that message board posters will not stop talking about to this day, it would be these: human, infallible, irreplaceable.